Hello there. So, events happen, points were won and lost, and now everyone is blaming models. No, it's not a billionaire's messy divorce, it's the return of FPL as the Premier League 2022-23 season kicked off in earnest on Friday night with Arsenal looking uncharacteristically professional. What the hell is going on? I should say, welcome to new listeners. I'm Tom. I'm probably your main host of WGTA, and normally I'll be joined by Lucy. But this week, and for another couple of weeks coming up, I'm joined by Pod OG Nick, who started it with me back in 2017, so all the way back then. You're right, Nick. Great to have the Eldu brothers back together again. Bop, bop. And no, that's not this week's theme. BT Dubs.
Hey Tom, yeah, I'm pleased to be back. It has been a while, hasn't it? I think my longest absence for the pod, possibly
Yeah, must
5 months
think so.
prior to prior to Harry taking over the course of the spring slash summer. But yeah, no, I'm good. Just came back from a holiday, so pretty knackered, but you've caught me in good spirits at least, and it's perfect timing after what was a great start. Certainly, it's given me the cure for the itch after a summer absence from FPL. Just a reminder, of course, for our listeners who we are. We are Who Got the Assist. So you can find Tom on the main account at WGTA_FPL. Lucy, you can find her at Lucy Hynett. And myself, you can find me at WGTA_Nick. Um, so yeah, on the pod today, we'll be bringing back market forces and the mini league update. We're going to be talking a little bit about outcome buyers in FPL. Of course, there'll also be questions and transfers and captains.
Cool. And just because we've got to date the pod in case surprises happen, I think it's just worth doing. I've been meaning to do it for 6 years, Nick, just to remember to say it at the start of every pod. But this was recorded on Monday, the 8th of August. So if something has changed, hopefully I'll be able to slip something in if it changes over the next day or two. But if something has changed, listen to this on Friday. And like, why haven't these
Just
guys mentioned?
the timestamp is 21:40, Monday, 8th of August, 2022.
Hmm. Maybe I'll just do it like that instead of all this blustering from myself. Right, okay, let's get into it, Nick. The first game week review of the season. Let's talk about what went well, what didn't go well for us, and I guess I'll go first just because, yeah, you did really well actually at the start of this year. But for me, I guess it starts with one thing. I don't know why. It doesn't even matter how hard I tried. Keep that in mind. I designed this team to last for just 2 weeks, and it's so unreal it went well. It really is. I got 80 points for game week one. That's not the best score in terms of gross tally I've ever had on game week one. That was last year's 96 when everyone did decently. But in terms of proportion to the rest of the field, it was an exercise in breaking the habit from a usually very mediocre game week one. This was a good one for me. I ended up on 250k on the first day. Pretty pleasing. All my 11 were away from home, so that's quite interesting. I ended up making a few small adjustments to the Beige FC I ended up talking through last Wednesday. So I swapped out Trippier for Gabriel after Conte's comments, and I shoved Edison back in goal for Ramsdale. I couldn't really call a goalkeeper, and that gave me a nice 10 point swing doing that little move. At the back, I ended up with Edison with that 7 point, the 7 pointer, swung a bonus too. Then Cancelo, Reece James, they both got yellow cards, but got 2 bonus points as well to get sevens, as did Gabriel with his clean one bonus. Double City defense was probably my big differential, and to watch time by and to watch the time fly as the pendulum swung got very tense as we entered the last 30 minutes of the game on Sunday. But it was very, very nice. The only paper cut was Trent's blank, but that was universally felt. So just a scratch. In midfield, did what he always does. Gifted the goal, wasn't he? But goal and assist. Martinelli got his goal. Diaz managed to dodge points, but generally was quite lively. And Bailey and Villa didn't go too great. Only a blank there. Got a question about it later, actually. And up front, Jesus didn't get on the end of the cross, but Haaland, who went with over Kane, did get a brace. So took me up to the 80, which is very, very nice. And just to mention, before we go on to you, Nick, Lucy's outcome too. So Lucy ended up with 14 out of 15 of the same players that I did. She only had Trippier to my Gabrielle, who scored the same at 7. So we both started off on 80. Some people may say we cleared it. There may be some questions about the invigilator's efficacy during the final stages of putting teams together, but we really didn't. It was a genuine surprise when I saw her team, although it wasn't too dissimilar from the one she put together on the final pod we did together last week. So maybe it was just her persuasive style that pushed me one step closer to the beige. Nick, very, very good opening week for you there, wasn't it?
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, it's a near perfect start for me. Ultimately, 88 points, all in total. Even though you've had an excellent start yourself, it must sting somewhat just to still see me beat you, of course. But yeah, just a real turnout for the books. I think just pretty much all the decisions, not all of them, but most of the decisions I made just went well. I targeted triple Liverpool, City, and Arsenal, and slipped in Kulusevski in there as well to make the 10th man. So just focusing on those big sides really paid off. So yeah, starting at the back, actually, that's where I did make a little bit of wrong decision. I made a last minute switch from Mendy towards to fund Diaz in midfield. And if I hadn't done that, I'd have actually scored in the 90s. So regretting that
Oh,
slightly, but I just couldn't I couldn't resist the allure of the 4 million goalkeeper after Schmeichel leaving. But yeah, just a real turnout for the books. I think uh, left me feeling pretty numb actually, to be honest. And I know I may end up failing too, but it's just a great start ultimately. Yeah, just left me crawling in my skin a little bit there. But yeah, what can I say? Overall rank 44k, certainly the best start I've ever had in FPL. So really really happy with that.
no, excellent, excellent stuff. It's always very nice, isn't it, when Game Week 1 goes pretty well. And so I think the double city defense was probably one of the big differentials for me. And for you, you had
Yeah,
Kulusevski. We'll speak
I had
about him
Kyle
later.
Walker as well. Yeah, so I went for the double City defence. So similar outcomes to you. Yeah, Kyle
Yeah.
Walker, Cancelo in defence, and then in midfield I went for Saka actually. Instead, I should have said I went for Saka instead of Gabriel Jesus. So I went for the 4-5-1, as opposed to most people go for the 4-4-2, and that got me extra points going for Saka and Martinelli and Gabriel. I picked up points from all of my Arsenal um, players ultimately because I didn't go for that sort of Gabriel Jesus pick that was kind of so highly owned by everyone. And then Haaland, we both had Haaland as well, 13 points. I think that was a big win for both of us targeting him, and of course the captain salary.
Overcame. Yeah, we'll speak
Yeah,
about that
yeah.
later. Yeah, no, definitely did well to avoid the FOMO on Jesus, that's for sure. I never considered not owning him, but it certainly makes sense, looking at your setup to go the 4-5-1 with your Luke Plange and your Greenwoods. But hey, you know what? It's worked out well for the first week. Let's hope it continues. Let's see how everyone else has fared. The WGTA Mini League is back for another year. The mini league code is JUXXXE. Yeah, yeah, memorable, isn't it? JUXXXE. I tried to find. I hit there and did the reload button, Nick, because you can reload the code over and over again. I sat there for a good 20 minutes hoping that WGTA would come up. It did not. I mean, if someone wants to kind of spend an hour, no, actually, no, you have to log into my account. You can do all sorts of wreak all
Yeah.
sorts of havoc. So I'm not letting you do that. But yeah, I've tried hard, but this one, fine. I'll leave it on that. We'll probably
Build a
close.
build a Python bot for that maybe.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Probably need someone cleverer than me to sort of show me how to do that. But yes, fair enough. Maybe there's some modelist out there who can handle that. But anyway, how well did everybody get on? Up top is Laurent Van Vasgal with Dream Team. And it certainly was a dream team for him. 101 points for game week 1. I mean, that's pretty decent, isn't it? Getting triple figures on the first day. I know loads of us got it last year, but this year that's especially good. So well done to Laurent. In second is FTID FC with 99. SG, well done, Mr. G. In third, Debarkan Matey with Counter Monte Cristo with 98. He's joined by my FPL team, Rob Doran, both with 98s. In joint fifth, there's three men. There's Adam Barham, Andrew Williams, and Rafi A. That they all got 97. In eighth, Black Velvet, Mohammed Farhan, 96. In ninth, I believe this is a FPL Sapphire on Twitter, Kevin Rose. Well, I've spoken to him a few times. I recognise the name. Yeah, very well done, Kevin. 95, very very good for game week 1. Takes him into 6.6k. Did use his bench boost though to get that 95, so a bit of a calculated risk there. And in joint 10th, Dominic Rust with Ride Along 22 and EJ Ibanga with Biggest Force, who triple captained Haaland on game week 1 to get him to his 94. I should also mention as well that Rafi A, who's fifth at the moment with Darwin's Evolution, he got 97 points. He captained Kulusevski, Nick. So yeah, a very ballsy move there for the opening day. Yet another individual who's very good at riding out the FOMO, much like you were with Gabriel Jesus. Right, and next one, the market forces, Nicholas. So we were back to take us through the movers and shakers in the transfer market. What's been going on? I assume, well, we already know that one big rise and fall has occurred, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people are transferring in Erling Haaland. He's already had 725,000 transfers in at the time of recording. And the big man being sold is Harry Kane, of course, 587,000 transfers out. And yeah, it's worth highlighting that they were both the same price at the start of the season, 11.5. But because of all the early transfers, there's been an early price change as well, a critical one as well, because Haaland's gone up to 11.6 and Kane's dropped to 11.4. So a lot of people had to react quickly and early, unfortunately, for this one. If they wanted to do that straight swap, otherwise they'd already been priced out. And, you know, we saw what happened at the weekend. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the pod, but obviously Haaland's got his brace, his first two goals for Manchester City came blanked against Southampton. So you can kind of understand why people are reacting so quickly as well and doing these early transfers, especially if you didn't have that sort of zero point 0.5 million buffer in the bank and you're planning that move. It just had to be done early, and I can understand it in this particular circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, Kane was trying to be what he wanted him to be, but what he actually was not Haaland. And I mean, I we'll talk about it later, but I completely understand why people have started with Kane and why people have pulled the trigger very early to go to Haaland. There's no midweek games, I pointed out on last week's pod. Um, and it made a lot of sense just to do it before the prices rose. I do feel sorry for those who didn't really realize that that might be an occurrence and how 0.0 in the bank and now kind of looking at maybe taking a hit at the end of the week. But yeah, certainly that yeah, have my sympathies if that was you. Another Man City man, in fact, two ex-Man City men, also dominating the ins and outs, right, Nick?
Yeah, so one person who had a great debut for Arsenal was Alexander Zinchenko, and he's already been transferred in by 40,000 managers at time of recording. And yeah, obviously he picked up an assist. He also got a clean sheet, so a nice 12-point return for anyone who punted on him. So a lot of people attracted to him. I'm just a little bit concerned personally about Kieran Tierney and how he fits in alongside Zinchenko. There's risk there, but great stuff for Zinchenko. Obviously, a lot of people looking at him as a great punt in their defensive line. And yeah, Gabriel Jesus, a lot of people selling him as well, possibly for Haaland, possibly for Mitrovic. But Jesus still has some great fixtures. Mitrovic actually is the third most transferred in player, 37,000 transfers in at time of recording for him. And yeah, I mean, Mitrovic is a funny one. It's worth talking about briefly because we've kind of been we've been punished by this guy in the past a little bit, haven't we? It's his fourth campaign now in the Premier League.
Hmm.
We're making the Cameron Jerome jokes in the Slack a little bit, but the numbers last year in the Championship were insane: 43 goals in 44 games. So maybe it is going to be his year, and maybe he will break that template. I certainly want to watch in the next week or two to see how he gets on.
Yep, I mean, as I said on the pricing pod, Tabula Rasa, he seems to have a team which is set up to service him now. All crosses aimed squarely for Mitrovic, and he definitely will be one of those players that we're going to have to consider at some point during the season. I've got no doubts about that.
Yeah.
Talisman as well. And elsewhere, your man Kulusevski, Nick, being bought by over 250,000 managers, and Martinelli as well, just that 6 million bargain basement price been brought in by about 240,000 managers. Now, on the sales, Nick, I mean, there's a couple of Spurs and also a Polish international.
Yeah, so Perisic is being sold, 200,000 transfers out for him. He didn't start this game week, and then he came off the bench for a one-pointer. And in the meantime, it was actually the likes of Sessegnon and Emerson who did start for Spurs that kind of delivered all the points and the returns from an FPL output. So manager slightly aggrieved there. And I think with Perisic, I think he is a really good punt for the future once he's kind of nailed down and settled in the Spurs back line. But there were so many 5 million defenders that did well this week, like Zinchenko, who mentioned, but also some of those that just racked up points, like Kyle Walker and Kieran Trippier as well, just getting those points. I think a lot of people obviously transferring out him, Zinchenko, Perisic, and also Matty Cash as well. Who's the fourth most transferred out defender. A lot of people banking on that Villa clean sheet, and they were just very poor against Bournemouth, unfortunately losing 2-0. So can understand why people are kind of moving him on. And then finally, Son, who you mentioned is the other Spurs player that's being sold. So three Spurs players are currently being sold in terms of the top five transfers out, even though they won 4-1. But it just is, there's a little bit of a fixture shift for Spurs. And I think a lot of people who went for Son might now be thinking, oh, actually, I need Salah or I need Haaland. And unfortunately, Son, like Kane, perhaps is being a little bit of a sacrificial lamb there.
Yep, 100,000 transfers in for Mo Salah as well. Cool. All right, let's take a break there and move on to the main section just after this. So we're back, and it's time to move on to the hot topic this week, which is how do we basically judge decision making in FPL? It's the big topic this week, I think, especially surrounding the salient Haaland Kane call, no Salah to some extent. I think we'll stay away from the specifics of talking about that mostly, and instead WGTA it, i.e., look at it strategically and give a macro view rather than delving into making judgments off one data point. So let's get into them. Let's get into it then and start off with looking at outcome bias. So outcome bias behaviorally is quite interesting. I don't think we actually got around to talking about it on the behavioral science pod in the summer, but outcome bias or resulting in poker is something I've mentioned a few times in the past. And it's the single biggest thing I see happening in game weeks like this when there's a 50-50, which has dictated the fortunes of individuals. I think that's fair to say this week that one 50-50 call, maybe two 50-50 calls has really kind of swayed how your week has gone. Simply put, outcome bias is a tendency to evaluate the quality of a decision based on the outcome rather than the thought process. People who succeed are assumed to have made better decisions, therefore, than people who failed. Now, there's several points of authority on this. I did a bit of research all around it on this one. And the first thing I did actually was re-listen to an interview I listened to in Australia actually, when you and Anthony were running the pod for me kindly when I was away. That was with a poker champion called Annie Duke on the Bloomberg Masters in Business podcast. And it was fascinating when she spoke about this idea of resulting or outcome bias. She said we have this very uncertain relationship between decision quality and outcome quality. In poker, she said, for example, you can have the very best hand, but you can still lose hand too. And that's basically what we see in FPL. We see the outcomes, like in FPL, we see that Haaland scored 13 points this week, whereas Kane scored 2, Salah scored 12, Son scored 5. But can we then walk that back into a faulty decision-making process? I don't know. I don't know. You can straw man whatever scapegoat you like for why you went down a particular path, but it's an open question at the moment as to whether that's a good or bad decision in game week one. And Duke says under those conditions of uncertainty, we have this outcome bias, this heuristic, which is if the outcome was bad, then it must mean the decision was bad. I think that's quite a kind of problematic approach, Nick. I mean, I myself have fallen prey to this a few times in my struggles as well, like panicking when the call hasn't come off, selling that player too early, and then next week they do something. I've done that multiple times over the course of the last 5, 6 years, so I'm not immune from this at all. And it exists a lot in the academic papers as well. So a good study I read earlier on today was a UPenn experiment, which used a legal case to ask subjects whether a certain city should have employed flood risks and use a part of a city's budget to mitigate against flooding. When exposed to the evidence that the city had at the time, so before a flood occurred, 24% of people felt that they should take flood risk precautions and put some of the budget in that area. When exposed to the outcome of the actions that this was supposed to prevent, when they were exposed to the outcome the action was supposed to prevent, so a flood did happen, what should they do? 56% of people said that flood precautions need to be taken. So the outcome changed perceptions around decision making. And in life and as an FPL, this means that when it comes to 50-50s, people who made one type of decision, such as being cautious and not risking it, um, succeed. When they succeed, they're often punished less than those who took risks. If they don't work out, and they'll punish more if they do, like punish it, like capturing a mad pick that pays off. And as we'll talk about later, there's a real goldfish bowl that this plays out in these days in FPL because of the increasing audience. But I'm simply not sure that judging anything on outcome alone is a good thing. I don't think anyone would ever say that, but I think it's one of those things that because there's a vacuum of too many other things to talk about this week, we're really zeroing in, Nick, aren't we, on that Haaland Kane call? What do you make of all this, Nick? Do you see outcome bias a lot? I know you're not on Twitter that much these days, but I mean, what's your view on this?
That's actually really interesting what you're saying about the flood defences example there. I'm surprised. I would have probably said that the outcome, if the houses all got flooded, that 100% would have said we should have put some flood defences up, as opposed to only 56% still making that call.
They weren't people who lived in that city. They were people who
So
were kind of,
they weren't people who actually had lost all their possessions based on
yeah.
the blood. There, they were just randoms looking at it from a distance. No, okay, fair enough. But yeah, I think obviously, as you said, the big calls this week perhaps were over picking those Spurs assets over the Haalands and the Salahs, and ultimately it's very easy to make those quick fire judgments and use that hindsight bias and be one of those guys on Twitter saying "I told you so" after the event. No one likes to see that at all, and ultimately if you do badly, you do feel like you've messed up. You do feel kind of to a certain extent, oh no, I made the wrong decision there. You can't help but look at that outcome, and it's just the other way around as well. Like it's what I found quite interesting actually. It was just on Twitter, like this account being praised, and I think it was the highest scorer without using chips, and he got 114 points. But looking at the team, there was like Lloyd Kelly in there for the 12 pointer and Jorginho for the 11 pointer, and you're like, hold on a second, this guy might be being praised, but
Yeah, yeah.
was the outcome really there when who could have foreseen that 12 pointer from Lloyd Kelly, for instance? That wasn't on the cards at all. So I think obviously the outcome is obviously excellent when you do really well, but in that particular extreme example, some of those picks were a little bit questionable, and I think certainly in FPL this happens all the time. But I think this week, because it's game week one, we've all had a long summer of no FPL. And you kind of thrown into it, and just such a critical decision, kind of, and such a strong swing between the sort of the no Salahs and the no Haalands versus the Sons and Kanes. I think it just does feel magnified to a certain degree this week. But you can understand the reasoning behind decisions in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I think with all of this, like I've been on the wrong side of numerous 50-50s in my FPL career, as long-term listeners will know. And I always just think, if my thinking was sound, I'm not going to get too upset about it. And after all, it's just FPL. I've got more important things in my life. It's not something inside me that pulls beneath the surface, consuming, confusing what is real. The key thing for me is peace of mind. I've gotten better at kind of making my decision and closing the door behind it. I'll happily reevaluate a decision in the cold light of day, but it's often a futile exercise to apply, full-on regret to a decision-making process and think, you're right. Like you do think, oh God, the outcome is bad. What have I done wrong? Often it's actually quite difficult, and I think trusting you've made the right decisions, or at least the decision process was good, helps you kind of recognize this outcome bias and helps you kind of get over it. But I equally recognize I've had a very poor record in FPL over the last few seasons, so I can't entirely dismiss outcomes. Like I'm a content creator. It's not as if I've not been analyzing potential outcomes for each wrong decision that I made in depth. 50-50s have been brutal for me in the last few years. So to be honest, even though I tried, it all fell apart. And what it meant to me would eventually be a memory of the time I tried so hard and got so far. But in the end, due to 50-50s, it didn't really matter. And I don't know, I still hold on to the idea that FPL is about putting yourself in the position to be lucky. And we've watched so much football in our lives, especially over when we were in lockdown, Project Restart, just in general. And there's so much, when you watch it from an FPL perspective, there's so many sort of pieces of luck, randomness, sliding doors moments which dictate outcomes, from Paul Gascoigne missing that sliding chance versus Germany to Salah being arguably gifted that goal against Fulham. Things can always be so damn different if things were just a tiny bit different. So yeah, for me, peace of mind is really key. And it's not so much about questioning was it the right decision? It's about asking myself, am I happy with the decision I've made? And I think that, that kind of is kind of how I sum it up. And Nick, how do you weigh decisions by their outcome versus the thinking? Is it the same as me?
Yeah, I think so. I think I kind of follow a similar approach to you. I think, looking at the outcome when it doesn't work out, and we've got so many examples of this in the past. I think actually the most infamous example perhaps was when we both didn't captain Salah in that, and I think that was the last time I actually went to an FPL meet. It was just the Chef Fest when Salah destroyed United, and I went for Vardy as a captain against Brentford and got 1 point. And I think you were part of the Havertz brigade that got the 3 points there, and
Oh,
we just got absolutely destroyed. And it was just one of those cases where like you do look at it, you're like, did I make the right decision there? Perhaps not. Perhaps I didn't go against the grain, but. I think that is part and parcel of the fun of FPL as well to a certain extent. We can all kind of be, these robotic drones that just, follow the algorithms week in, week out and keep the captain on Salah. But, you do have to kind of try and find that balance, that perfect difference between having fun and kind of just going straight with what you think the best decision is and what the analytics are saying. So it is a tough one ultimately.
oh, it definitely is. Like, it's really tough to be a content creator, especially like I'm not talking about myself here. I'm talking about those who are much more successful and more high profile than I am. They'll probably be like, I don't know what you're expecting of me, put under the pressure of walking in my own shoes while I'm caught in the undertow of just being an amateur podcaster. But yeah, I suppose we should probably mention it quickly, shouldn't we? I mean, on Haaland and Kane and on Son versus Salah as well, clearly the outcome couldn't have been more stark. And the natural question to apply what we've been talking about would then become, was it a terrible mistake to start with the Spurs men? And I mean, there's a bit of an unpleasant sort of underbelly, which is, as you mentioned earlier, Nick, is going around going, oh, I told you so, you shouldn't have done that, you bloody idiot. But and we both started with Haaland and Salah, but I still think the answer is no. It wasn't a terrible mistake. Like it's so easy to look at outcomes and use them as a proxy for judging decisions, like I said earlier on. But the reality is hindsight's 2020 vision. Tottenham were expected to beat Southampton comfortably, and they did. The fact that four Spurs goals were scored and only one return came from the premium duo is simply something that can happen in the beautiful randomness of football. See also Kai Havertz blanking in that 7-0 Norwich game. And it was a decent bet to make. It really was. Like if things turned differently, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these things are swings and roundabouts. I think I do have to say though, I think you do have to weigh up the outcome and kind of look at it and you say, right, could you, if you didn't go for Salah and Haaland, could you have foreseen the events and the alternative outcome? And if that's the case, did you have a backup plan? And if you don't have a backup plan or there wasn't, you don't have a route to get Salah and or Haaland in for the week later to kind of rectify your position, then that's where you can see it perhaps more on the blunder side than the bad luck. And maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but that's just kind
Hmm.
of how I kind of see it to a certain extent as well.
Yeah, but on the other side of it though, like if they had outscored Haaland and Salah, then you would probably have had one or two assets with a smaller ownership and a flying start over everybody else. So it's
Hmm.
you can see that how the odds kind of fell. And if you are one of those unfortunate ones, I'd say this, this is one of those moments which occur throughout the FPL season where you've got to think to yourself, the decision making process, I said earlier, was fine. The outcome didn't fall my way. Dust yourself off and move on. Simple as that. And as you saw in the market forces, Nick, many have already done so. Kane to Haaland, raising the price in conjunction. And the FPL season's so long, isn't it? And there's so many opportunities to make up points as well. Loads of 50-50 situations to come that you may or may not find yourself on the right side of. Just keep backing your instincts, stay calm and don't panic. One of the game weeks ahead will go your way and you'll reap the rewards from backing your judgment. And, on all the stuff that's going on Twitter, don't worry if you're not on it, you're not missing anything. But I just think if the outcome was different, this would simply be a non-issue. It wouldn't, just wouldn't be brought up. That's what I'll be saying on that. You mentioned outcome bias earlier, hindsight bias earlier, Nick, and that's an interesting one as well. It's another really interesting name for that is creeping determinism, better known as the I knew it all along effect. And it's basically the same as outcome bias. It's the commonly observed behavior for people to act like a result was more predictable after the fact than it was at the time, shockingly. And I think that there's definitely a few ways to sort of mitigate against this, or at least to kind of guard against kind of this lurch into hindsight bias. I think it kind of, as people say, hindsight is 2020 vision. There's a few things that I do. I write down my initial decision every week. So this week I've got my memo on my phone. I've just written roll transfer basically, and then see if I'm still feeling the same on Friday. Obviously, if I'm screwed by price movements, then that changes. So if I did own Kane game week one, I would have moved to Haaland on Sunday. I try not to make decisions under stress if possible to ward off decision fatigue. That was really bloody difficult during the COVID periods to me. But in an ideal world, I'd do that. And I try to recognize, and it's very hard to do so, when I'm in a negative decision spiral. When you were like, oh, whatever I do it wrong. Therefore, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I try to stick to the same process and recognize again that sometimes it's just kind of, bad luck. And it's all really a matter of perspective, isn't it? Like if something goes wrong, I tend to look at it on the pod, and I appreciate not everyone has that sort of outlet, but I have the time to look at it on the pod and work it out, talk it through. And often, if I've made a mistake, mitigating factors like overthinking or over drinking have led to it. And in many ways, you can put everything down to something else and avoid responsibility. That can be really helpful for some, like blaming luck, blaming experts, or explaining that you're pushing back on a modular approach. I think the reality is, as FPL Raptor said on the behavioral science pod, like once the deadline's gone, that's it. You've got your result effectively. And the fact we don't know the outcome is what makes FPL so exciting and moreish, because those big wins are cherished, aren't they? And they really make up for these sort of deep lows in our bizarre existence in this strange part of the virtual space. But how do you avoid emotional reactions in hindsight, Nick? Are you the sort of person who kind of just tries to let yourself cool off?
Yeah, definitely. I'm never one to kind of make a decision or make a transfer immediately after a game. I certainly always kind of give myself that breathing space just to kind of look back at the decisions I've made in the previous game week, understand the reasons why I made those decisions. Typically, it's with a sort of 5 or 6 game week mindset, and
Yeah.
and then and stick and well, I'm not necessarily stick to the plan because that's not always the answer, but kind of, assess the new situation, find that moment to just say, right, okay, I made a bad call here. By not bringing in a player, can I rectify that decision? Can I bring him in now? If not, what can I do to get him in? Did I bring the wrong player in? Should I be getting rid of them straight away? It's just giving yourself a little bit of time, and ultimately, it isn't all about time. Looking at the data sets, looking at the say the analytics or whatever, looking at the performance on the pitch as well, the eye test, and just kind of weighing up all those different factors, and then deciding what to do off the back of that. But I think the key element is to avoid a instantaneous reaction. Just give yourself that moment because there sometimes you have to react quickly. Like with the price rises and price changes this week, but typically you do normally have a few days to kind of consider what you're planning, what you're doing. There's normally fixtures midweek in most weeks as well, European fixtures or cup fixtures typically. So just to not rush and just to kind of frame your decision and take the emotion out of it as much as you can. As we're not all mindless drones. Ultimately, we're not all kind of like
Borg.
robots, Borg. Yeah, exactly. We're not all Borgs, just kind of following a collective mindset. But just giving yourself a little bit of time just to kind of really weigh up why you're making your decision and understanding why you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with reacting quickly as well if you feel like you've made a mistake. I mean, Kane to Haaland, as I said, completely understand that. Remember last season, I went with Gundogan over Jota, and Jota then went on and scored against Arsenal, and I immediately reversed that decision, took Gundogan out for Jota, and profited basically when he went on a very good run around sort of November time, I think it was. So, Nick, how do we judge decision making in FPL? I mean, from the discussion we've had, what would your kind of closing thoughts be?
Yeah, I think ultimately with decision making in FPL, you always, and this is just the reality of the game, unfortunately. You can frame your decisions, but you're always going to be determined by that most basic of metrics. And this is really boring, but it's just basically how you're going to be judged is on how you score and what your overall rank finishes. But if you don't perform well, if things don't go, if you go against the grain, you can always look at your decision and say, actually, I agree with what I did. I do think I do actually believe in something of a bit of a hybrid theory as we're kind of moving back to that sort of Borg template stuff. Um, so I think some picks they are templates for a reason, but you can kind of look to try and find that element of a differential. So in my mind, to try and avoid just being too assimilated into that hive mind. For instance, I went in for Saka over Jesus, as I said, went for the midfielder over the forwards, slightly mixed up with the 4-5-1. Went for someone as well who's a bit more of a separate pick, which is Kulusevski over Kane and Son, and yeah, that worked out for me. But I think many managers might say they might look at the analytics, and this week the analytics won, but there's been so many weeks over the past season where I've seen people on Twitter saying, "Oh, I'm doing really badly," but the analytics were there, and arguing that the analytics were there and their decision was right because of the analytics. It just didn't work out that way, and there's countless examples of that last season as well. And over the course of the season that some of the best managers in FPL have amazing histories, and it might not work out for them week in week out. It never does. It's a game. There's an element of luck, but over the history, you tend to kind of revert to a mean of quality performance. Ultimately, I think.
Oh, I love the Fabian Delph reference there. It's the rules of the game, and also the Trekkie reference, the simulating information. Brilliant. I've got visions of Analytics FC as Borg drones now. Excellent stuff. As you said though, Nick, it's about recognizing there's a role for randomness, luck, variance, whatever you want to call it, in sports and fantasy sports. It creates variance, which is a fancy word for randomness, deviation from the expected mean. I think about it, at least I do. Maybe I've watched too many Stranger Things. I've got images of a grandfather clock in my head. But I think about like a pendulum swinging between 3 points. On the left, totally against you. In the middle, matching your expectations, kind of. And on the right, when things totally go your way. You have one of those game weeks where you get 100 plus. Everyone does something, and you're really kind of in hay. What makes it swing really though is down to that factor of luck, randomness, variation, variance. It's all uncontrollable. And as I said a second ago, well, a little while ago now, FPL was a lot about putting yourself in a position, I think, to get lucky. Again, it's not me hiding behind luck as a catch-all. There's many things, as Nick said, with the kind of managers who just are able to turn good seasons in, who are able to churn out good seasons year in, year out. There are things that they do to improve things, and that often tends to be from conversations with the likes of Matthew Jones and Abdul, FPL Salah last year. Things like guarding against overthinking via decision fatigue, things like over management, which I think I'll try to, there should be a reanimation of that topic later on in the season, that's for sure. And as Nick said, taking a moment just to kind of take the emotion out of it. We try to control this stuff, this FPL malarkey, as much as we can through careful planning and research and analysis. But often you're just at the mercy of fine margins falling your way or not. And I'm sure I'll get a bit annoyed by that at some points during the season. But I've become so numb to them as well. I don't feel them there like I used to. I've become so much more aware that there's more to life than being pissed off by fantasy football over the last kind of 6 years, and that's because they've been a bad 6 years. But you know what I mean? It's hopefully that you can derive from that. A final point: famous behavioral scientist Daniel Kahneman used to say, or it does say, I guess, that the stock market is based on the illusion of skill. Let's apply that to FPL for a second. And there's loads of reasons why you may have done a lot of work, but been undone by randomness, just to keep in your mind. The first thing is the quality of research, as we've been talking about. You've poured over data, listened to podcasts like this one, done your own work, but it's still gone wrong. I mean, that's just randomness that upends that. there may also be an element of pride and ego. Like you don't want to appear to be wrong, which can also lead you to do things like, get stuck into sunk cost fallacy, hold on to a player when you shouldn't for a long time. Or your cousin in your mini league is texting you saying, "Oh yeah, I've beaten you this week. I've thrashed you," and you kind of think, "Oh yeah, I want to keep trusting this player that I've been waxing lyrical about. I want to keep this guy." And there's also kind of, if there's money at stake through mini leagues or some other things you may have done, like monetizing your content, that means you don't want to appear to be wrong because that could potentially render your skill irrelevant. But the illusion of skill, and I think there is an element of skill in FPL, shouldn't be completely overrun by luck. I think that it's kind of the two things go hand in hand. And recognizing all these things and the fact you've infused your thinking with reason, I think that should be enough for you. Like outcome bias does exist, but I think it's one where we can be pretty happy. I think from the conversation we've had, just acknowledge it, and try to move away from it. Except in moments like making the transfer from Kane to Salah last night, where it makes sense to quickly remedy the situation. Excellent, cool, very interesting. Let's take a break there and move on to the first Q&A of this season.
And
Oh, wait, wait, wait,
it's
wait, wait, wait,
oh,
wait.
so we're back, and it's time for our Q&A section. So the first question is all about being back in the 2018-19. So friend of the pod, Chris FPL Janino, he's asked us if it's back to 2018 with Haaland's arrival, but with a reference to sort of Aguero, I guess, when we had the best Liverpool attacker, Salah, and City attacker in Haaland each week, and we have to give the captaincy to the one which has the easiest game. And I guess it kind of leans on a little bit in terms of a captaincy discussion for this week as well. Salah, Haaland, they're the two main guys. Who are we going for?
Yeah, no, I think overall it's quite interesting just to discuss to some extent. I mean, I don't mind that you've got this Aguero Salah dichotomy back this year. I'm not a big fan of captaincy as it is, just because I've had really terrible experiences with it over the last kind of 5 or 6 years, as it's so prone to the 50-50 swings we've spoken about, making or breaking your game week. And if you get a few of them wrong, that's your season in the trash. I mean, we'll see if things actually do get easier, to be honest. This week we've got Liverpool and City playing Palace and Bournemouth respectively. And in game week 4, it's the opposite. So Liverpool then play Bournemouth and City then play Palace. And it may be that, Palace continue a fallow run and Bournemouth may kind of then had a good game first game. But they could fall off the cliff. And then you're kind of looking again at a split being quite close. And it'll be like I'm paranoid looking over my back at one option. And it will be a whirlwind inside of my head as I try to figure out who to go with, and I hate it when that happens. To be honest, it's just the captaincy for me is it's always been a bit of a kryptonite sort of view to me. Um, but I don't know. If anything, that kind of makes it easier just to focus on squad composition. I don't know whether that's a bit of a cop out, but I just like the fact that it becomes more about the players you bring in around the peripheries, getting those individual bandwagons right, getting that judgment right, and whether you take a hit each week and all that sort of thing. I like the fact that it brings the focus onto those things rather than did I happen to get a 50-50 call right every week. I think captaincy wise, I don't know, like Haaland against West Ham. Um, I think he's the real deal, that's for sure. It silenced the critics in after the Community Shield. Like the second goal, which featured that kind of freakish burst of pace to create and score with aplomb, his one-on-one from the De Bruyne through ball. That was particularly eye-catching, wasn't it? And despite Bournemouth, as I said, keeping Villa at bay for the opening weekend, I think City, sporting that innovative 2-3-5 system in attack, and Moyes said afterwards that West Ham couldn't get near them. They had too much for West Ham. I think they might have too much for the Cherries as well. And the guys amassed 2.6 xG in 2 games in English football. And I don't know, maybe it's plan continuation bias, sunk cost bias, Nick. But for me, I started the season with him thinking he'll be my captain this week. and managers are already flocking to join me, it seems, with Haaland rising in price. And I find it very difficult to see past Haaland this week. What do you think about both this return to an older mode of playing with two clear captaincy options, just rotating, and I know you've got Salah, haven't you, as your captain this week at the moment, your bus team?
Yeah, he is captain in my bus team. I think it definitely adds a new dynamic to the game. I think since Salah's arrival, there's kind of been a very clear auto captain pick week in, week out, and there's not really been that debate or anyone who's been able to consistently rival him. I mean, occasionally you might last season you might have captained the likes of Son or someone over Salah if Son had a clear, better fixture, but typically you'd have just captain Salah, especially for these sort of plum home games against the likes of Palace, and that feels like a perfect fixture for Salah. And I don't want to be caught in the undertow of the wrong decision, and there is that risk there, especially with the effective ownerships. That both of them are going to be over 100%. I think next week. So you will see that even if for the one you don't captain, you're going to be negatively affected, especially in some of your mini leagues. And I still favour Salah, and I do have a few reasons behind it. That I don't know if they're kind of weak source reasons or not, but I just think that Salah still has a little bit more of a higher ceiling than Haaland personally. And what I will say about this is there's a couple of reasons, and it's mainly about FPL positioning. But I think that Haaland, he does offer a lot for goals. I'm not convinced yet. He offers a lot for assists. I can see him sort of being kind of like one of those sort of Harry Kane type, old Harry Kane type picks where you get like 30 goals in the season and two assists to accompany it, for instance. And I think with Salah as well, they equaled each other this season, this game week. But he does get an extra point for goal. He does offer assists. He gets an extra point for clean sheets, and that's just why I think
Yeah.
he perhaps has a little bit more in terms of what he offers over Haaland still. In terms of the fixtures, I think the Bournemouth started off pretty well against Villa, but Manchester City is going to be a much, much meaner opposition. So I definitely could see Haaland picking up a couple of goals against them as well. It's at the moment it is on Salah, but certainly when we get close to the deadline, I might make the switch back to Haaland. It's not by any means guaranteed that decision at all.
Yeah, no, definitely. Unlocked at this point, Monday, the 8th of August. Um, I think what's interesting here, though, is to discuss Darwin Nunez. And there's a few questions on this. I think I'm going to just push that question up in the running order. Andy at Fancy Guide FPL asks, can we remove Jesus for Darwin in future? Even though he acknowledges that Jesus has Bournemouth in game week 3. And Sim, the troublemaker at See What I Done, also is interested in Nunez. And he even floats this big up top with Nunez, Haaland, and Kane. Can we see that coming into vogue? I think Nunez is really interesting. I think that might be kind of a bit of an antidote to that kind of what you were saying about Salah a little bit. It's a one game basis, yes. I mean, we know that. Nunez had the highest XGI in the Prem, though, this whole opening weekend 1.6 in just 40 minutes. I think that I think Mark, Fancy Football Scout, Mark Southerns, was mentioning this as well, and he could change how Liverpool play, and it could see Salah's potency change as well. Like in the Athletic, they were suggesting that Salah's overall deployment will be altered a bit because there's a central focal point now who operates differently to how Firmino did. Firmino was all about making space for others, and he was being very selfless. Nunez, I think, is a bit more selfish. Like he's looking to score goals for himself rather than make goals for others. Um, in answer to Andy's question, I'm sure Nick will echo me here. I'm not sure at the moment about selling Jesus anytime soon, but I can see why your eye's been caught by the Uruguayan, like Sims has. And in terms of that question, having the big at the front, I still feel like having the premium mid is probably going to be important. I certainly get the willies about not owning and therefore not having the options of Captain Mo every week. And as our friend Bernardo's Maldonado Matt said astutely in our Slack, what's interesting about Darwin is that we might, especially if he starts to, as I said in the positioning, diminish Mo's potential, be able to rely on him as the main Liverpool attacker in the future, and other players like Sterling, Bruno, Son, De Bruyne, who are shut out due to having no room at the inn because you're on Salah and Haaland, could suddenly become considerable, especially if Darwin and Haaland are viable captain picks. Like it makes me feel dirty at the moment, though, Nick, to even consider Countenance going without Salah. I feel bad. I feel so faithless, lost under the surface, saying that. We'll see. Basically, Sim. It could be a bold risk that comes off this big at the front thing, but I mean, Nunez, Nick. I think that maybe it's because I'm sure he'll be in line to start against Crystal Palace. Maybe he might change the dynamic of that Liverpool forward line in a way we've not seen because we've not seen Salah play with an out and out centre forward, have we?
Yeah, yeah, you are making me doubt on my captaincy decision a little bit with some of that rhetoric and positivity around Darwin Nunes as well. But also you haven't mentioned Luis Diaz as well, who hit the woodwork and how he can impact. But of course, it's less of a formation shift in that respect because he's essentially going to be sort of playing more of that Sadio Mane role. But at 8 million, he can perhaps be the midfield enabler for our Liverpool team as well, especially if you think that there's an opportunity to go without Salah in the game, and I don't think we're quite there yet, just mainly because of effective ownership. But you could say perhaps you could go for sort of a more of a Nunes Diaz pivot and double up on your Liverpool attack that way. I think in terms of the sort of big up top, I think you probably know my views there already. That I'm not particularly proud of the front line, the old classic 4-3-3, which was that's kind of the way we used to play FPL actually back 5 years ago or so. I remember our days of Costa Kane, Kaku, Aguero sort of rotations going on, and that kind of premium front three. I think it kind of feels a little bit antiquated. And maybe Nunes and Haaland, these exciting new attackers joining the league will change that. And maybe we will start to see a bit more money thrown up top. But for now, I just feel like there's better value in the defence and the midfield. So I'm not going to be rushing to kind of bring in an extra attacker from my perspective yet, even though, as you said, Darwin started brilliantly. I don't think there's a case of moving on Jesus to Darwin as of yet. I don't think we've evolved that far still.
Yeah, no, certainly. I'm still the same as you. I'm willing to give Jesus some time. Would have got an assist this week if Odegaard had taken a shot rather than trying to pass it. Thing of Arsenal, mate, we were trying to walk the ball in. Ridiculous. All right. Next question. Eye catching Blanca. So, friend of the pod, Adam Pritchard, 35 Who, Punchard asks which player that didn't return caught our eye nonetheless. I mean, any players in the league who didn't return this week catch your eye, Nick?
Um,
And
so I thought, yeah, I kind of thought this was his chance to have us shout out his own pick here to a certain extent with Adam's own Aronson, he was unlucky actually to return. It seemed like he had scored, but ended up being an own goal. And I know I've seen a lot of Leeds fans who are waxing lyrical about this guy, new American at the club, only 21 years old. He's only 5.5 million in midfield. So perhaps he could be that kind of midfield cheaper differential, especially after the likes of Bailey, the likes of Neto did end up blanking. So for me, I tried to look around who did well that didn't blank. There was a few players that kind of still did quite well that are on off the radar, like Madsen, but he did pick up an assist. But I think for players that didn't even score at all, Aronson was just the one that I just wanted to quickly shout out.
yeah, no, good. So I did look at Aronson before game week one, but I just concluded there wasn't enough data on him beyond the YouTube highlight reel because StatsBomb doesn't carry Austrian Premier Bundesliga data, so I couldn't really assess how good he was. So maybe the models were right in this occasion based on 1 week. Hey, who knows? And yeah, the one to bear in mind, especially with Bailey and Neto, as we quite later, certainly failing to impress in their early audition. For me, in terms of pure football, it was Gundogan at City, simply a fabulous player. Watching him, wow, like he was really good in the game, like, incredible close control, and a couple of really cool moments showing his in-game intelligence as well. Like the take from Cancelo before the pass through to Haaland to win that penalty was just brilliant. It really was a really nice sort of on the half turn. In the second half, he did a turn after possession turnover, which took out two players in one movement. Simply just a sumptuous footballer and really high in the position maps as well. Probably not an FPL asset currently, but there we go. In terms of the player who didn't return, which caught my eye though, I'm going to combine this with the question from Joshua Biggs at What the Big C, who asked if we would keep Diaz for one more game or would one of the other 8.0s be kind of looking more interesting to us? And he also asked which one it was the worst, which I'll speak to about in just a second. But yeah, Diaz, I thought it was kind of an exercise in points dodging a little bit by him. As Nick mentioned, hit the woodwork, pretty decent in the game, obviously not offside as well for that lovely curl finish. Had a couple of other moments didn't quite go his way. I mean, there's definitely a fear with him that he could be all fart no poo, as some are suggesting. But I remain fairly happy with him for that Palace game at least. I you basically saw him a lot of the time. Like Robertson basically had that entire left flank. He ended up in centre forward a lot, and Firmino was kind of out and kind of just about on the left hand side. And we saw that with Martinelli and Jesus too for Arsenal. And as you said, Nick, I just kind of feel like points are going to come from him. If they don't come from him over the long term, then he's going to go in the bin. But at the moment, I just think that he's probably the one to own. Moving on to Joshua's question in general, I will be keeping Diaz Joshua for this one, and then I'm probably looking at Kulu. So I'm locked into Free City, or I'll be interested in Foden, as I said last week. 6.6 points per 90 over the last two seasons, which is very good. Very muted against West Ham, that I felt as well. But Kulu, as Nick astutely recognised by picking him early on, was obviously a great sort of sop for not being able to fit in the premiums for Spurs, and their fixtures get pretty good really after game week three. There's Chelsea games, the biggie, and then between game weeks, I think it is between game weeks three and six, something like that. They play Wolves, Nottingham Forest, West Ham, and Fulham, and you expect them to do well in that. So I'd really be looking perhaps at moving Diaz to Kulu if things don't go well for Diaz in the second game and just kind of going with that. Like as Nick mentioned, a few of the eights look pretty good this game week. Madison, as Nick mentioned, Saka got in the points as well. And the worst one, I think, was Mahrez, underlying why he's only really a free hit pick. And then with a distinct nose hold done minutes to midnight, he was on late, wasn't he, in that game? And Mount, too, was pretty quiet in the Chelsea game. I mean, Nick, I know you're keeping Diaz, but you've got two eights, haven't you, in your setup? What are you
I've
thinking
got
about that?
yeah, I've actually got three eights in my team. So
Three
I've
eights. My
got
God,
Kulusevski, I've got Saka, and I've got Luis Diaz. So yeah, I've got
madman.
three of them. But yeah, I mean, Kulusevski, he was excellent. Saka, I'm pleased with his performance, and Luis Diaz was the only one to blank for me. But yeah, you kind of alluded to the point that hopefully he doesn't continue to blank, but certainly he performed well. And yeah, I think Madsen was worth a shout out, especially like that run from sort of game week 6 to 13. I think I'll be really considering putting him in for that particular run because Leicester just have this excellent run of fixtures. I think they only play Spurs out of the top six over that period, and they're just playing a lot of dross like sort of Norwich and not Norwich, so Nottingham Forest and in Leeds and Bournemouth and Fulham and stuff. So they've got a really nice fixture run. I actually forgot about Mahrez as an 8 million pick, so that's obviously a good shout out for the worst. But the player I was actually going to call out for just not being particularly great was Mason Mount. And it's not like he performed badly or anything like that. I just think what's interesting about him is just how much he was shown up by a 6 million defender in his team, Reece James. Just doing a comparison between sort of what Reece James offered and what Mason Mount offered in that game is just proves the point that actually is it worth having this guy or is it worth disinvesting and putting money into defence as well? Because James did 17 crosses compared to Mount's 2, and he had 30 final third passes compared to Mount's 17. And James was just all over the corners, set pieces, just really sort of negated Mount's sort of attacking influence and impact. And just Reece James is defender, he's 2 million cheaper. he just looks like such a better FPL pick compared to what Mason Mount offered. And even with the yellow card, he still picked up a couple of cheeky bonus
Yeah.
and for the clean sheet as well. So just proves that particular point. So I kind of understand why a few people mounted up and went for it, but I think just your money's better spent on that Chelsea defence. I think ultimately.
Yeah, I know for sure. I mean, obviously those corners were huge in those cross numbers, weren't they? I mean, I think there were like 10 corners from the left-hand side during that game. There was that kind of spate of corners in the first half where Holgate kept heading it out for another corner, and James kept kind of trotting up and hitting the first man, who was Holgate, every single time. But yeah, getting 2 bonus points from the yellow, same as Cancelo, really shows what monsters these fullbacks or wingbacks, however you want to define them, tend to be. I mean, the only thing to reference with James is the links with another wing back. So
Yeah,
Dumfries, I think, has been referenced. Carl Walker Peters has been referenced. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with him. At the moment, obviously, keep him in your team if you do own him, and do keep an eye on him if you don't, because 6 million for him in that spot is ludicrous value, and they do have decent fixtures after this game week has gone. Leeds, Leicester, Southampton, and West Ham after Spurs. So one to keep an eye on, that's for sure. But if there is an attacking win back that does come in, then I think things start to become a bit more dicey. Looking at the Chelsea players, maybe like Koulibaly or something could then become of interest because he has a better X mins than Reece James does. But yeah, no, that's one for the future, definitely. Right, penultimate question: midfield enabler wobbles. Mark at FPL Positivity asks if Bailey and Neto posted encouraging stats, or should we start to consider removing them now? Well, neither did, obviously. I mean, Prudence did a goal, which is a kick in the teeth, obviously, for Neto fans. And Villa appeared to be incapable of finding that final ball against Bournemouth, and that dislodged the Bailey bobsleigh from the track. I mean, I was never convinced by Neto or Wolves, and it looks like a Euro fantasy favourite Gonzalo Guedes is now going to be joining them. So that could again complicate matters there. In terms of Bailey, I know he didn't return, but I take great heart in the fact that he didn't get subbed off when Villa were chasing the game. He played the full 90 despite the fact that there were 5 subs available. Other players who were attacking were brought on, the likes of Buendia, the likes of Watkins. So hopefully that means he's playing a big role in Gerrard's system. So good for Everton, right? The fact is, though, the system didn't work. So it may be that the Bailey bobsleigh doesn't end up in the bin. At 5.0, it was still an okay bet, I think. He may well end up being removed ultimately for someone else like Josh Da Silva or Levy at Southampton, just because Pereira at Fulham looked a valid 11th man because he was so high up the pitch, was on all set pieces, and he could be one that you could throw in, elevate the other 10. I'm going to definitely give Bailey Everton, but after that, it's open season, really. We'll see what happens, especially if he doesn't do anything there. I mean, Nick, you started, you said earlier on, with no budget mids whatsoever, the 3/8s, Martinelli and Salah. Was it the shoddiness of these options which kind of led you away? And would you be saying to people to, eventually think about moving them on?
yeah. I don't know if it was the shoddiness of the options. I just ended up with a more premium midfield. And I said to you that I actually thought I had one in my team. I completely forgot that I'd moved Bailey on um, close to the deadline. But yeah, I think in terms of the picks, I think pre-season we all saw that Bailey was performing excellently. We all kind of looked at Neto's pricing at 5.5 and thought actually he's a great shout. And they did blank obviously this week. But I don't necessarily think there needs to be a rush to remove them. You look at some of the other options out there. There's nothing that's exciting us too much anyway. You say, oh yeah, Pascal Gross did well get with his brace against United. He's an old classic sort of pod favourite from when we
Oh, yeah.
started. Um, but it would feel a little bit knee jerky, I think, to kind of target Gross off the back of that one performance. And you don't need to kind of rush to kind of make changes here. There's normally other fires to put out, or you're better off rolling your transfer and seeing what happens after the next game week, as sort of Tom suggested. So, I think there are other options down in that sort of cheaper price bracket, but I think, both both players did all right. Neto had a few shots. Bailey, as I said, we were a bit disappointed what he offers, but he was doing very well pre-season, so certainly still got that potential. And you said he played 90 minutes as well, so obviously got the backing of the boss currently.
Yeah, I mean, Gross, 7 goals against Man United in his Brighton career. Uh, this week, both conversions at the back post. Maybe he just hates United as much as some United fans seem to, you know.
Didn't he get bonus points one
He
time when they
did,
lost against
yes.
United and
Yeah,
he didn't actually return?
yeah, he got 3 bonus points because he created loads of big chances. And classic Brighton and ex-Albion weren't able to score. Yeah, I remembered that fact as well. But yeah, Talisman Theory, hero, wasn't he, in that first season? I think got 164 points, something like that in 2017-18. And absolutely smashed it. I remember we did the prospects and the prospects. Well, it's really going far back, isn't it? Where we pointed out that he created more chances for Ingolstadt than Mesut Ozil did in the Premier League.
That
So
was
yeah,
that's one of the classic who got the assist pod stats that somehow was just stuck in my memory as well. Like, I think we must have said it so many times just
I
to say
know, I know.
it.
God, it's repeating ourselves all the time, aren't we? Right, and finally, a nice segue question on transfers and captains. Content provider, content provider. Because FPL Rockstar says he's feeling strangely content with his team locked for next week already. He asks, can it be like this every week, please? And he asks, should we feel this way? Or should we be looking for something to do? I mean, I'd stick and not overcomplicate and hope your team provides a decent encore. Do you want more than 80 points plus? I mean, obviously, you haven't all got that, but in our position, if you're doing well, if you're feeling content, then yeah, no, easy role transfer. If you were in a position to do Kane to Haaland, do that. But otherwise, I think just stick with the plan, at least until game week 2. As I said in preseason, after game week 2, all bets are off. We start to begin to see what could be a good route to at least navigate the early weeks and you take it from there. And probably the same for you, right, Nick?
Yeah, it is the same for me. I'm in that same sort of frame of mind right now. There's not a whole series of changes that I need to make. Of course, I would say that in my position, so I was lucky enough to do well. So yeah, just I think with FPL, people do sometimes have a tendency to overmanage. You don't always need to. If you're in a good position, then just stick with it if you're feeling content.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And that nicely and effortlessly, seamlessly moves us on to transfers and captains. So, I mean, neither of us doing anything, are we, this week, Nick? And yeah, I mean, you're looking pretty set apart from the Salah captain. I guess you're just rolling. There's just nothing else really to say.
Yeah, I am planning on rolling. I kind of was thinking before game week 1 about Kulusevski and moving him on, but I'm not going to, obviously, based on what happened now. So, that's looks like I'm going to be set for next week and see what happens. And yeah, decide on that captaincy decision whether it stays on Salah or if I end up just, you know, FOMOing into Haaland as the
Mm,
captain.
the EOs can be pretty substantial there, I think. So it'd be interesting to see what you do. Although I'm sure there'll be loads of people who forget FPL exists, who are going to keep the captaincy on Salah. So maybe the EO will mean that it becomes a bit more of a split pin one. And it will be, I'll be crawling in my skin for choosing Haaland over Son over Salah, but we shall see. Yep, same for me. No transfers for me, barring a random croc in the in training this week. I've rolled in a free transfer. Hopefully, be able to do 2 free transfers, do something or other when it comes to game week 3, or maybe just one. Who knows? All 11 men at home for me this week as well. So hopefully, another 80 is in the offing. But I suppose that's what you always say before you get 30 points, and the armband is squarely on Erling Haaland. Great. Well, I think that's your lot this week. Hopefully that was useful. Thanks, Nick, for coming on, subbing in for Lucy. I believe we will be back again, not next week, but the week after that, game week 3.
Yep, scheduled in for game week 3, so look forward to it. Yep, so one game week down, one step closer to the edge. We were who got the assists. You can find us on Twitter. Their main account's at WGTA_FPL that Tom manages. Lucy, you can find her at Lucy Hynett with 2 T's. And myself, if you want to follow me at WGTA underscore Nick. As we said at the start of the pod, there was a theme to this pod, as there normally is when I do make appearances, which is often why I end up talking a bit weirdly and trying to shoehorn random references in here and there. I use that as an excuse as to the way I speak. Hopefully, you spotted the references. And if you liked listening to this, please like to subscribe to the podcast for the new listeners. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating across stuff like iTunes and Spotify. So that really helps us with the algos to help get the pod out there.
Yeah, yeah. We used to do themes for newer listeners back in the day when Nick was on the pod week in, week out, just to make it more fun for us. And yeah, it's always fun to do it when he's back. But yeah, thanks very much indeed. Do go ahead and do those things. We'll speak to you very, very soon. Lucy will be back next week to pick over the bones of game week 2. Next Monday or next Tuesday will be released. Farewell and all the best. It starts with one thing. I don't know why. It doesn't even matter how hard you try. Keep that in mind. Design this rhyme to spend due time. All I know. Time is a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as the pendulum swings. Watch it count down to the end of the day. The clock ticks like the way. It's so unreal. Don't look out below. Watch time go right out the window. Try to hold on. Didn't even know. Wasted it all to watch you go. Kept everything inside. Didn't even know I tried. It all fell apart. What it meant to me would eventually be a memory of the time I tried so hard and got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. Okay, bye.